It's been a year now, over a year. And for many of us, there were lots of things we were doing that we actually haven't done for more than a year now. Things we could do with our eyes closed. Things we've been doing for years. Things we felt obliged to do because apparently it was the right thing to do. Things we loved and we really miss. And I wonder, will we just go back to doing all those things we were doing? And if we do, how will it feel? Will it feel odd to take up that hobby again? Or will it feel good? Will it feel odd to get back into that routine again? Or will it feel good? And there is part of me that asks the question, did we really enjoy it before we had no choice but to stop doing it? Or were we just doing it because it was what we have always done, what we were good at, or what people expected of us? Easter is really interesting, isn't it? Having had the sadness of Good Friday when the disciples believed everything was over as they watched their Messiah die, we then have the unbelievable joy of the risen Jesus on Easter Sunday as Jesus appears to Mary and then the disciples. Well, I say unbelievable joy, but I wonder how they truly felt. We know that when Jesus appeared to the disciples, they were behind locked doors for fear of the Jews. Jesus spoke peace to them, but I wonder how they were really feeling. Yes, joy, but maybe a mix of other feelings too. They must surely have felt confused and unsure about what they were going to do next. A week passed and Jesus appeared to them again, and I wonder how they were feeling in this gap of time. In an instant, their world had been changed, and they must have felt really confused about what was going to happen next. And that's where we join them in John chapter 21. The world as they knew it had stopped, and now there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. And it makes me think of just how over a year ago the world stopped for many of us too. And right now, we have this little glimmer of hope on the horizon. So, what did the disciples do? We see the disciples go back to what they used to do. Simon Peter was with 6 of the other disciples, and he decides to go fishing. It is what he knew. It's what he was used to and what he could do well. And in moments when we are unsure what to do, doing what we know, something we're used to, and something we can do well, it somehow feels comforting and encouraging, doesn't it? So the other disciples decide to tag along with Simon Peter too. The interesting part is that although this was something they used to do well and something they were used to doing, this time it wasn't working. They fished all night and they caught nothing until Jesus turned up. And that's what made the difference. And that's the first thing that I want to draw out of this morning. The first thing is that we need to be listening for and acting on the prompting. Fishing was something that Simon Peter knew how to do, but at this moment in time, it wasn't working for him until Jesus showed up. When Jesus told him to change his tactics and throw the net on the right side of the boat, suddenly they had a great haul of fish. At this point, they hadn't even realised that it was Jesus talking to them. They were given a suggestion, they tried it out, and it brought amazing results. Then they looked a little closer. And only then did they realise that it was Jesus talking to them. You know, whatever we are doing and whatever we plan on doing, when we come out of lockdown, we need to be listening out for that still small voice that is speaking to us. You know that suggestion that you think you might try, that you think's a little bit crazy, but which you think you'd like to give a go anyway? Well, maybe that is the voice of Jesus, giving you the prompting you need to try doing things slightly differently from the way you were doing it. Don't ignore the promptings. Pray about them. Chat to others about them and do something about them. And if Jesus is in it, then it will be fruitful. When the disciples acted on their prompting, they ended up with an amazing haul of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved recognized that the person speaking to them was actually Jesus, and he told the others. And what does Simon Peter do? He immediately jumps in the water and goes to Jesus. And that's the second thing I want to draw out of this story. Whatever you are doing, get closer to Jesus. You see, Jesus had turned up in their situation, but they hadn't recognized him or even realized who he was. He had prompted them to do something, and they acted on that prompting. As a result, Jesus turned a situation around. But only then did they realize that it was Jesus. I love the way that Simon Peter reacts. Someone else tells him that it's Jesus, and he immediately jumps out of the boat, into the water, and makes his way to Jesus. There's no stopping him. You know, there will be many times in our lives when something has happened. Maybe we have had that prompting to do something or say something or be somewhere, and we know that it was Jesus who was prompting us. And as a result, we have drawn closer to him. But then there may be many times also where we have chosen to remain in the boat of familiarity. Every so often hearing that prompting from Jesus, but maybe we don't always take it seriously or have the courage to do something about it. And maybe sometimes we're content to stay in our boat of familiarity and wonder whether it really is Jesus on the shore speaking to us, rather than jumping out of the boat and having a closer look. Just recently, I enjoyed an online Christian youth worker conference, and one of the guest speakers was Justin Welby. And he was asked what advice he would give to all the youth workers who were watching. His response simply was an urge for us to get closer to Jesus. We can only do our job if we are walking closely with him. But isn't this true for all of us? We can only live fulfilled lives if we are walking closely with Jesus. And we cannot do this without making changes in our lives. Peter had to jump out of the boat, and he ended up getting very wet. What is it that you and I need to do, which we might not necessarily be comfortable with, but which we know will enable us to get closer to Jesus? I wonder if there's something that you've been thinking about just lately, thinking about doing, that might bring you closer to Jesus. Well, I just want to encourage you this morning. Maybe it's time to start doing that thing. So, we need to listen for and act on the promptings. We need to get closer to Jesus. And finally, we need to respond to the challenge and the call. As Peter gets closer to Jesus and spends time with him, he then receives a challenge and a call from him. Jesus asked Peter 3 times if he loved him. And each time Peter responds saying, "You know I love you." Having denied Jesus 3 times, here is his opportunity to redeem that situation and respond to Jesus, affirming his love for him. You know, we can mess up like Peter did, but how wonderful that Jesus gives us a second opportunity. We may not always get things right, but Jesus comes back to us and asks us, "Do you love me?" The question is, how will you respond? I wonder where your heart is right now. Each time Peter responded, Jesus gives him a task. Notice that it is to feed his lambs, to take care of his sheep, and to feed his sheep. In Luke 5:10, when Jesus first called Peter to follow him, he told him that from now on he would fish for men. There's a real sense that this was a calling to evangelize, to draw people to follow. But this new calling is one of growing followers, feeding and taking care of them, whether young or old. Peter isn't just going back to what he used to do. Jesus is putting a new calling on his life. And I wonder what Jesus is calling you and I to do now. I've been doing my current role for over 20 years. And although it has the same title and I do a lot of the same things I was doing when I first started this role, I know full well that my heart and passion for different things has changed over the years. I know that God has placed different issues and different people on my heart to reach out to. And I have had the choice as to whether to follow his calling on my life or not. I guess the question for us today is, are we responding to Jesus in love? And what calling is he putting on our lives right now? Is there a different calling for us now than there originally was? And what are we doing about it? Right now, our circumstances have changed, and many of us are asking whether we should just go back to what was. The obvious answer to this is that we need to be asking Jesus what he wants us to do. Because if we go back to what we were doing and Jesus isn't in it, then it will be fruitless. So what do we need to do? We need to listen for and act on the promptings. We need to draw closer to Jesus. And finally, we need to respond to his challenge and his call.